Hello, I'm Jim Miller. I'm here with Andy Overton and Henry House. The FlipSide starts right now. Welcome to the show. Tonight we're pleased to have with us Deputy Director of the Board of Elections, Barry Jackson. Barry, welcome.
Thank you.
So, election season is here again, right? Does it ever leave?
No, there's never not an election season. As soon as we're finished with one, we start cleaning up from that one, and then we start working on the next one.
So we have a lot to talk about, but what I'd like to do first, because obviously this was, needless to say, a very talked about election here in 2020, just several months ago. Talk to us about some of the lessons learned from the 2020 election.
Well, I think from our standpoint as election officials, the number one lesson that we learned was we're able to adapt. This was an election unlike any other, and so we had no frame of reference, really. We were kind of making it up as we went along, but in the end, when we did conduct the election, everything seemed to go pretty smoothly, and we got a lot of good comments from voters and candidates that, in the face of all that we had to have happen to us, we were able to adjust and actually have a pretty successful election.
Excellent. Andy?
Yeah, so, there's always this question out there about the validity of the ballots that we cast, whether it be from mail or whether it be from any other, way that we cast ballots. So can you just talk a little bit about, did we have any fraud cases? Did anybody find anything that seemed to be out of sort, or truly was it about as smooth as you say it was? Give us the dirty details about whether we had any fraud issues.
Well, and we understand the concerns. Mm-hmm. When somebody marks their ballot and they put it in an envelope and stick it in the mail, they lose that control. Now
That's
they're like,
right.
well, what happened to it now, right? And it's even really the same thing when they show up at a polling place and they mark their ballot and they stick it in the scanning unit. They're like, now what, right? So to answer your question, short answer is no. There were no fraud cases whatsoever. We're not even aware of any in the state of Maryland, let alone in Washington County. But we have a process that we follow that makes sure that everybody has access to the ballot, number one. And number two, those that do vote have their vote counted. Mm. So we have bipartisan teams of election judges who count the ballots. And so that's always the case. There's never a case where it's just one person looking at a ballot or handling a ballot. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that we have those checks and balances in place.
So you're telling me, I'm going to follow up, sorry, Henry. So you're telling me that you have heard of no cases whatsoever of fraud in the entire state of Maryland?
That is correct.
And how many ballots were cast, do you know?
I think it was in the neighborhood of about 3 million.
Yeah, interesting, great.
Yep.
Henry?
I know when you were on previously, we talked about how we have the ballot boxes that we could drop it in to pick up around the county, which was a convenience factor, and they were being monitored and emptied on a regular basis. How many people possibly voted twice they said, well, I'm not sure if I got my ballot in or not.
Right.
I don't think there was malfeasance in the way that they chose to cast their vote.
Right.
Okay. But they may have dropped it in the mailbox, and then you had them marked off, and then they come in and they want to vote, and they're not able to vote. Did you have any issues like that during this election?
We did have a number of that where people, like you said, they started to feel a little nervous about their mail-in ballot. Did it actually get there or not? And so they did end up showing up at the polling place. And so what our policy is, and it's actually federal law, if someone shows up at the polling place, and even if we show that they have already voted, we still allow them the opportunity to vote.
Okay.
They vote by a provisional ballot, which means that ballot is now set aside, and then we research it and make sure that they should have been able to vote or not.
Well, let me do a follow-up real quick on that. So they submitted a vote by another means, and then they cast a provisional ballot. If the people that they voted for in the provisional ballot are different than the people they voted for in the original, which one counts?
That's a good question. So in the 2020 election, and this was just because of the emergency proclamations that the governor gave, because of the fact that we were allowed to count absentee ballots ahead of time, that had to be the one that counted.
Okay.
Because it was already counted. And so if someone showed up at the polling place and voted a provisional ballot, and if they had already voted an absentee ballot that counted, then obviously that provisional ballot would have been rejected.
But in a normal election cycle, not a COVID election cycle.
Correct.
In a normal election cycle, if I voted in a provisional, those aren't counted until actually all the general election is completed and those votes are tallied.
Correct. So now that the emergency proclamation is over,
Right.
and we're back to the normal way that we conduct elections in Maryland, if someone sends in an absentee ballot and then they show up at the polling place and vote a provisional, in this case, actually both of those are rejected. And under current state law, both ballots are rejected.
Okay, so if I accidentally submitted it and then I come in and I'm putting a provisional and we're in a regular election cycle, both ballots are going to be dismissed?
That's correct. And so we try to get that word out to voters,
Okay.
Because, when they show up at the polling place, it will show in the poll book that says that absentee ballot was issued to them.
And that's because they're voting anonymously. You can't, well, actually, if you can discard the early vote, there has to be some tracking mechanism for that. Is that an ID on the outside of the envelope?
Correct, yes.
But it only says yes or no. It doesn't say who they voted for.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so the envelopes have their names and their addresses on them. So the envelopes so we can match up. We can say, okay, here's that person's absentee ballot, here's that person's provisional ballot. And then we send those to the board
Okay.
to rule on it. They voted twice, and under state law, they have to both be rejected.
Okay, interesting.
And so, like I said, we try to get that word out so that people, if they show up at the polling place, and our check-in judges will say, it says here that you were already issued an absentee ballot. And, if they say, okay, yeah, I sent that in, but I'm not sure it got in, so I really want to vote again, we try to counsel them that, you may not want to do that,
Right.
So.
But we also have the situation where, we have a late-breaking development right before an election, and all of a sudden, it's played all over the front page of our local newspaper, and I say, I don't want to vote for that. Can I change my vote? And you're saying, sorry, you've already exercised your right.
When a person marks and mails a ballot, that's basically casting their ballot.
Okay.
So there's no.
Just the same as you can't go back
Right.
on Wednesday after election day
Exactly.
and
Right,
say,
and change-
Well, it depends what jurisdiction you're in. Not in Maryland.
Okay, I don't know about that one. Okay, interesting. So, in terms of those mail-in ballots, you said if a mail-in ballot is mailed. So let's talk about that. So I asked for a mail-in ballot. I get it, and then I decide I don't want to do mail-in ballot. I want to do voting in person. If I don't mail that back to you, can I still go vote in person?
Yes, you can. But in this case, again, you would still have to vote a provisional ballot because it says in the poll book that you were issued an absentee ballot.
Okay, but as long as they don't find when they research it, and under normal cycle, not COVID cycle,
Right.
as long as they don't find that mailed-in ballot elsewhere, then my vote at the poll will count.
That is correct. And that's why we do the canvassing procedure. We research these ballots and make sure which one should be counted, what do we have from this voter, and then, as long as they have the one ballot, they get that ballot to
So
count.
let's talk about that for a second. Given all of the issues, concerns, conspiracies, dare I say, about
Dare you
this
say?
most recent election cycle, how did the process change on the back end in terms of your people or volunteers, or who counted the ballots? Who made the decision? Andy wanted to vote for X and not Y.
Well, that was Andy's decision.
Well, no, but I'm saying, I like that.
There we go.
But let's say that Andy had
was
those
awesome.
two ballots. Let's say that Andy had those two ballots or whatever, or there's something that causes, or Andy had she had a hanging Chad, or it wasn't, she didn't use the pencil hard enough on the ballot. How does that get?
Again, so going back to 2020, which was, a different situation, because of the fact that we were getting ballots in early and we were counting them early, we had to count the absentee ballots. So if they did vote two different ballots, an absentee and a provisional ballot, that provisional ballot would be rejected, regardless of who they intended to vote for.
Okay.
That absentee ballot was counted.
Let me ask you, because we fill out by bubbles, and there was, I don't believe it was in Maryland, but it may be another state. They were, some people were told, and they used a black ink pen instead of a black felt tip, and the machines were, those got discarded or set to the side. Are we smart enough here to determine if we fill in a bubble and it's black, that's where the vote's supposed to be, or do they really need to make sure?
Really,
or do they really need to have a specific, Sharpie pen or a Bic or
Right. So I'll give you a couple scenarios. So if we're talking about people that are actually at the polling place, we had black ballpoint pens in the voting booths for them to use. If they decided to pull one out of the purse and it's a blue pen or something, the scanning unit would tell us if it's not going to read it.
Okay.
So if it read it, then that vote was counted. If it didn't, it would send it back, and it would say there was unreadable
Right there
marks.
with the voters still
Right
standing.
while they're standing there, yes. And so then the election judges are trained to tell that voter, okay, now you have a choice. You can get another ballot and mark it with the good pen, and then try again, And so, or you can just say, forget it, and I'm out of here, So they have that choice at the scanning unit, and so hopefully they would make the choice. Well, yeah, let me go ahead and mark another one.
So what happens with the mail-in ballots when someone uses a pink pen
So
in their daughter's room? And
that
then
was
what?
right. That was the other scenario, and we have that happen.
Yeah, I'm
we
sure.
get mail-in ballots that are marked with all kinds of pens. We then duplicate that ballot. So then we'll get another ballot, and this is what I was talking to Jim about earlier. We have bipartisan teams of election judges that will read off that ballot, and then they'll mark another ballot exactly as that ballot was marked with the proper ink. And then that duplicated ballot then gets sent through the scanning unit. And we still keep a copy of that original.
Right.
So yeah, that's how we fix that.
So how long do you keep paper ballots around? Do you just have boxes and boxes in a storage room someplace filled with the 1970-something election cycle, or
We're required by law to keep voted ballots for 22 months.
22 months?
You're right. So basically, it's right before the next
next
election.
election.
Yeah, we get rid of it, and we'll get them shredded. So we have a big shred event. We have a big truck comes, and boxes of those things get thrown into them and get shredded. So.
Wow.
That's kind of amazing.
and this is a
actually.
weird side note, but because of COVID, when you went to vote, everyone got a new pen.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's true.
How much money did that blow on your budget on all these pens that we were giving to individuals?
Yeah, we bought 100,000 pens.
Wow.
Did you use 100,000 pens?
No, we didn't use 100,000, but but that is true. Every time one was touched, it was never touched again. The person that touched it kept it. We did the same thing with the privacy sleeves that we put the ballots in.
Okay.
Oh, right.
We ordered tens of thousands of those because we didn't want to use them again.
Right.
And so when they scanned their ballot through the scanning unit, they took that privacy sleeve and stuck it in a bin, and it stayed there for the rest of the day.
Did the state government or federal government provide additional funds because of the steps that you had to go through? 100,000 pens, 100,000 sleeves, or is that just out of the county coffers and we got to look at higher sewer rates next
I'm
month?
afraid the taxpayers of Washington
Okay.
County footed that bill, yes.
All right. I was just curious.
Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll have some more with our Deputy Director, Barry Jackson.
So what happens now, Barry? Like, we've had all these different rule changes, obviously, for the 2020 election and the COVID election. What's staying? What's going? What will voters expect different when they show up to the polls the next time?
There were a number of bills that were introduced in the General Assembly this year. A few of them did pass, and the ones that did, and actually this is a new thing from Maryland, is the permanent absentee list now. So a lot of states do that, where if you decide you just want to get an absentee ballot every election, you can get on a list, and you don't have to keep applying for it. And so now Maryland will have that. So if you apply for the permanent absentee list, you'll automatically get a ballot mailed to you every election. The only time that would not happen is if you end up not voting for 2 elections, then they'll take you off the list. Or you could always ask to be taken off the list too. But other than that, if you keep voting, they'll keep sending you ballots.
Is there a cross check because the ballot shows up at my house and my mother-in-law is no longer with us or something, and not that I would do that, but I send it in and she's now 172 and she's still voting in the election. So is there some type of cross check with death records to
Right.
every election to make sure that we have the people who are eligible to vote voting?
Yeah, of course, we always maintain our voter registration database. That goes on a daily basis. So we get records from Department of Health and Mental Hygiene about folks who have passed away, and so we'll take them off. People move, they move out of the county, they move out of the state, so we constantly maintain the list.
I mean, I'll give credit because my father passed away early in 2020 when I went for the primary election. I asked, and he was already removed from the voter roll. So I, give credit where credit's due. That
sure.
You guys were right on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's usually a little bit of a lag time, obviously.
I mean, it was about 3 months, but yeah.
Interesting.
Yep.
So she had asked, Andy had asked, what is going to carry through? Are there any other things that are going to carry through?
Yes. In the general election, if you remember, instead of mailing everyone a ballot for the general election like we did in the primary election, we just mailed everyone an application to get an absentee ballot. So you had the choice to either get it or not. And so that's actually going to be permanent now. For every election, we will mail out an absentee ballot application to every registered voter in the county. So,
Okay.
and they could throw it out, they can put it in the bird cage, or they could fill it out and send it in, So, again, going back to normal, quote unquote, we will have all of our polling places open again, all 49 in the county for the next election. So there will be the opportunity to vote in person at your local precinct. That will be available. Another thing that's staying from last election is drop boxes. So ballot drop boxes will be permanent because mail-in voting is not only not going away, it's only getting more popular. We had about 29,000 people voted by mail in 2020. We don't expect that many in 2022, but we do expect to have more than we did in 2018. So somewhere between 3,000 and 29,000 is what we're going to have. So we'll have 4 drop boxes around the county. That'll, like you said, they'll be emptied once or twice a day, every day, 7 days a week, as soon as they're put out. And they're always emptied by election officials, and we'll have badges on them, and they're always bipartisan teams, and they bring them back, and then we process them from there. What else is new? For Washington County, this is kind of big for us. They changed the criteria for how many early voting centers you should have in each county. It used to be that up to 125,000 registered voters, you only had to have one early voting center. We're hovering it right at about 100,000 right now. So ordinarily, we'd only need to have one. They changed it this year to up to 50,000, you could have one. From 50 to 100,000, you have to have 2. And then 100 to 200,000, you have to have 3. Well, now that we're hovering around 100,000, we're certainly required to have 2, but I think we're going to try to have 3 because maybe by election time we'll have over 100,000 registered voters. And
So is that a law where you can't have more than 3 if you're only at 99,000, or you have to have at least 2, but could you put out 5 if you wanted to?
You could actually have more, but you'd have to get permission from the State
okay.
Board of Elections. You have to show a compelling reason why you need to have more. Yeah, I mean, they would never not accept it, but you just have to, it's another step you got to go through to have more than the required number.
And is the thought there to geographically distribute the early voting centers so that the folks from Hancock that wanted to vote early don't have to drive to Hagerstown?
Yeah, our initial thought was that it should be geographically located, but the law is that you have to be within 5 miles of 80% of the population.
So everything's going to be within 5 miles of Hagerstown.
Hagerstown.
Pretty much going to be around Hagerstown, yeah.
Yeah, well, 5 miles west of Hagerstown gets us a lot closer to Clear Spring than.
True.
Yeah, it does.
So,
Let me ask regarding the way with our precincts, and you said 38 different polling precincts?
49.
49 polling precincts. If I go and I'm supposed to vote, let's say northern middle, but why can't I go vote at another place that's in Washington County and still have the right ballot? Because this is all being moved up into a cloud on a regular basis. They're
Right.
all interconnected. The Russians aren't going to hack into the voting machines in the Washington County system, we hope.
You sure
Okay?
about that?
Yeah, you
I-
heard
I'm-
it here first, folks.
Yeah, all right.
Henry House says it's not going to happen.
Well, if they start targeting us, we really have problems. Okay, so why can't we vote in other places? If I'm taking, someone else, to the polls, my mother-in-law, an aunt, or whatever, I'm taking them to the polls, and they're scheduled at a different precinct. why can't I just cast my vote while I'm
Yeah.
there?
Well, first let me address one thing you said. Our election system is not on the cloud whatsoever.
Okay.
So I want to make sure everybody's aware of that. Okay, it is a hardwired VPN that only we can get to.
Okay.
So there's no concern about getting hacked. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's that. As far as voting anywhere, so we did have vote centers in 2020 where you could go to anyone in the county and you would get your ballot.
Right.
We have 53 precincts in 49 physical locations. So we had to have 53 ballot styles so that somebody from Dargan who shows up in Hancock can vote a Dargan ballot, okay? And so we had to have all the ballots at all the vote centers. So we're going back to our normal local precincts again. So only the ballots for those precincts are going to be there. Having said that, if you do go to another polling place, we don't recommend it, but if you do, you can still vote. You just have to vote a provisional ballot. Which then would be set aside. We have to research it, and we have to say, hey, did Henry House vote the ballot he should have voted? Chances are, if you live in the county and you go to another county precinct, it is the same ballot.
Right.
It's just that it's
City of Hagerstown or the other cities that have their local elections on.
right.
Right.
Yeah, if you go to a different city precinct, you still got to vote a provisional, but it should be the same ballot.
Okay.
You know, so that's okay. And so what we would end up doing is we would accept the entire ballot, you know, because you voted the right ballot, basically. But again, that's just another step, and then it ends up not getting counted until after Election Day. So that's why we always recommend people go to their home precincts. It's a lot cleaner. The ballot's counted that night.
So we couldn't just print one ballot for everything and just kind of say, oh, well, this section doesn't pertain to you, and the computer knows not to count those votes?
We can't even vote with the right ink pen. Do you really think that the
And when they're provided by the government.
is going to be able to just ignore the bottom half of the city council ballot? Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Well, our elected officials like to know who voted where and how they voted, right? So the only way to do that is to have a specific ballot for a specific place. So, you know, so whatever precinct that we can say, hey, you know, this many people showed up at this precinct and this is how they voted. The only way to do that is have a special ballot just for that precinct. So that's why it has to be done that way.
Okay. Everything's a little more challenging than it should be.
Interesting. Andy?
Oh, yeah. So, all right, last question. So for the next election cycle, anything that you're changing internally, not because a law was passed, not because just best practices. Have you figured out better ways? Or maybe you guys are just absolutely rock stars, which we think you are, but was there something that maybe jumped out that said, oh my goodness, that really worked this year and we're going to continue through, that has nothing to do with laws being passed?
Well, again, you know, last year we really were just, you know, going hour to hour.
Sure.
We were learning and coming up with new ideas. I mean, innovation was the key last year. And so, yes, we learned a lot of things. And so, again, you know, ballot drop boxes are going to be around from now on. And, you know, vote by mail is going to be more popular. So, you know, the things that we implemented last year to try to get through the election, we're going to continue to do. So we ended up, because of all of the different things that we had to start doing. So we were counting ballots during early voting. We were counting mail-in ballots.
Right.
So we had early voting going on, but we were still counting ballots.
Right.
And then, of course, we had Election Day, and then, you know, then we had the canvases after that, and we were picking up ballots from drop boxes. You know, all of this was going on before Election Day, and so we utilized our election judges a lot. You know, we have 6 people in our office, you know, and then come election time, we have 500, you know, people, and so those who were willing and able. We utilized them, and you know, so we had election judges picking up ballots for us. We had election judges counting ballots at, you know, during the canvassing and working during early voting. And now in 2022, we're going to have 3 early voting sites. You know, so now we're going to have a lot more people working all at the same time. So there's a lot going on that didn't used to go on, you know, during elections. So that really just managing all of that is the biggest challenge for us, and so. Again, I think we kind of got a good practice in place through that last election. You know, we kind of joke that, you know, if we made it through that one, I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
right. Everything else is good.
Oh,
yeah.
You know, I have to ask, were there any surprises? Were there any things that came up on Election Day in 2020 that you thought, should have thought of that one?
Or just yes. The answer is yes. The entire 2020 cycle.
Well, I can give a couple of examples, again, of just, thinking on the fly.
Right.
When we had early voting at our new place on Virginia Avenue, we figured it was going to be busy. We, in no way, were ready for the crowds that came. We had no idea it was going to be that crowded. And so what we ended up doing was we had lines of people outside the building. We had it would look like Hershey Park. You had like lines of voters outside the building. And one thing we noticed, so people were driving up the parking lot and they were literally driving toward the voters that were standing in line. And all of a sudden I had this panic attack, that, my gosh, these people are completely exposed, So we called the county and they got their highways department to come and put concrete barricades down for us. And,
idea.
that was, that made me feel so much better.
Well, that's a good idea.
Another thing that the county suggested that was excellent was in the summertime, the GIS department came up with a pool wait time, because I guess the pools, you can only have so many people in the pools at a time, the public pools. And so they came up with a wait time app for the pools, to say, okay, how many people are waiting, that kind of thing. And they suggested we adapt it for the wait times at all the vote centers.
Yeah.
And they did. It took them, I think, a couple hours. They adapted it and put it together, and then we used that on election day. And we put that on our Facebook page, and a lot of voters took advantage of that.
I did.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So our election judges were basically texting me, saying, hey, it's about and they were kind of eyeballing it, and they were saying, it's about a 15-minute wait time. So I would put that on the app, and it was funny because we actually. I think Girls Inc. was an example. They were one of the shorter wait times, and so I put that on there. And I think at one point we even got to no wait, so I was able to put no wait on there.
Yeah.
Well, everybody saw that.
And
Everybody drove to Girls
There was a
Inc.
half
So
hour
people
wait.
started calling. Hey, you said it's no wait. There's like a half an hour wait here.
That was
does
a half an hour
An hour ago,
Yeah.
and there was no wait.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Thank you. That was great information. When we come back, more with Barry Jackson, Deputy Director for our Board of Elections. Stay with us.
Let me ask about turnout, because with all the discussion and all the changes that we had in the way that you guys successfully managed things, voter turnout, I think, was a little bit lower during this presidential election than the previous two, as far as percentage-wise.
correct.
And we always expect the gubernatorial election to be lower than what a presidential is. But we made so much ready access for people to get out there and vote. How can we improve people's participation level in this? What are your thoughts to doing that? Because we've made it a lot easier for everyone to vote, but we still didn't get the participation level that we did 4 years earlier in presidential.
Yeah, and I think we as a county were on the lower end as far as the state goes. The state actually had a record turnout generally, but yeah, we were, like you said, a little bit lower. I kind of attributed that to just the pandemic. Just keeping people away, but it really only kept a couple of percentage points away.
Right.
So, as far as getting more people to vote, I can't speak for how people feel, because believe me, we do a lot of voter outreach, a lot of voter registration drives. At the end of the day, people have to be motivated to vote, and around the country, people were motivated to vote, apparently.
Right, because you said even in the state we had record turnout, but in Washington County, we were actually below. So I guess where's the disconnect with people in Washington County from our surrounding area?
Right. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for
Okay.
you. Yeah.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot
No.
because you guys did an excellent job. I'm just trying to figure out, with all the ready access to get people to vote, how come we didn't have record numbers?
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk about putting more polling places in certain areas, maybe where people don't have access to public transportation or whatever it might be. Just trying to make it easier for people. But at the end of the day, some people just don't want to do it.
Right.
We can't make them do it, right? So, we do the best we can, and it's up to them after that.
So what was the turnout difference? Do you have those numbers between 2020, the general election, and I guess 2016 would have been the last presidential? And then also, I'd be interested, because it was the start of the pandemic, or kind of in the mid of the pandemic, that we did the primary. What was how significantly were those numbers off?
Yeah, I don't have the primary numbers in front of me, but I remember we had about 31,000 people voted, I guess, which would make it about 31% turnout, because we have about 100,000 voters. And that was in the primary, which is lower than a normal primary. Usually you're about 50% for a
Really?
presidential primary.
Okay.
And you know, in 2012 we were at 72.5%. In 2016 we were at 71, so it did come down a tick. And then in 2020 we were at 69%.
Now, it's important to note, though, that 100,000 number is registered voters. That's
Correct.
not eligible voters.
That is correct.
Right.
Do we have the eligible voter? Is that going to make us all sad? Because I'm guessing all of us at this table probably voted and will vote.
I did vote, yeah.
We looked that up just to get an idea of how many people are not registered out there, and the Census Bureau seems to think from age 16, which is when you can start to register, even though you can't vote yet, but
Right.
you can register then. From age 16 and up, there was about 140,000 people in the county.
Wow.
Now we have 100,000 registered, so there's 40,000 people.
140,000 people above
eligible.
the age of 16.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So-
we have 100,000 that are registered.
So there's
So they
there's
missed
40,000 people that,
40,000
yeah,
people.
exactly. That
And
seems
then
like a
of
lot
those
people.
100,000, only 70% voted.
Well, in one election, 39, you said? 31%?
I
right?
think you were talking
Yeah.
about the primary.
primary.
Yeah.
And by the point we had our primary, I think both of the big ticket candidates were already determined.
Well, that's
So it may not have been an incentive to go out there, I got to vote for.
Entire true.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Interesting.
still amazing, though, because if we had 70,000 vote, that's 50% turnout based on eligible voters. If
Correct.
that number's too, or something, maybe something a little more than that if you count the 16 or 17-year-olds. That's kind of scary.
There's going to be a big push too. I mean, I know that nobody has crystal balls, right?
Right.
But not that the pandemic is over, but things are changing. I don't like to say we're going back to normal, because what is normal?
Yeah.
But things are changing, right? And so I really do expect a bit of an uptick in that, even though it's an off year. It's not a presidential year, but I'm really hoping that people will come out for this midterm election just to vote. I mean, I don't know. Maybe the pandemic kept them down
Well,
because they couldn't hop on public transportation because they were afraid to. I mean,
Well, the gubernatorial, at least in the primary, should have a lot more activity because there's the governor's seat's up. Okay, that should encourage people to get out there and exercise their right. When we get to the general election, maybe it's not as much excitement because you're going to say, oh, well, it's X and it's Y. Those are my two choices.
Sure.
And
I
I
don't like
know,
either of them
I
or
know,
whatever,
I don't like either of them, so it's not worth my time. Or X is going to win. Why vote? But then you look at your local elections, and that can be decided. I mean, city of Hagerstown, how long was that decision delayed for the city council, I believe, because they were so
for
close?
the city council, yeah,
Yeah.
between Brugge and Perini.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, it was that close that the results were delayed.
Right.
If we would have had 5 more people show up and cast a vote, it may not have been delayed that long. So, I mean, it's amazing how one vote can really swing.
Yeah, you bring a lot of facts to our program, which I really appreciate, because we like to be wherever, because the three of us and the others are usually opinion based. But I'm going to ask you this, and this is an opinion, and I'll ask it in a way that hopefully makes it more palatable for you to answer. Do you have any evidence that suggests that all of because we all see politics on Facebook and every other, do you have any evidence to suggest that stuff, that noise, increases the voter turnout? Could you see an appreciable or even any kind of an increase, from let's say 2007 through 2020? If you look at those numbers, has that increased, and does anyone attribute that to social media?
I couldn't speak to the social media aspect of it, but I can tell you that our turnout percentages have been pretty steady, regardless. Usually right around the 70%, a little over, a little below. It's usually right around there.
Okay, so here's my opinion piece. So it doesn't matter. We just have people on Facebook that like to complain, and
So regardless of the tools that we have and that we utilize, we're really not moving the needle on getting more voter participation.
No, but then we're also, we're the people who are voting, you want to keep them. There's a retention effort, right? So you don't want to drop below that. So some of those pieces also, the push for votes and the push for registration is to keep people voting, that voted before, to keep them voting again. So you got to maintain that at least.
Do you have any local demographics about voting age? In other words, or
Oh, right. yeah.
Generation X, Generation Y, Boomers, who's more likely to vote?
Yeah, we've looked that up in the past. You know, when we just talk about turnout, obviously not how they vote, but
No,
just
I
turnout.
get it.
Right.
Yeah, no, turnout.
Yeah, certainly the older you get, the higher the turnout.
Okay.
It is the lowest from like 18 to 25, and then a little bit more, 25 to 34 or whatever. And usually right in between the 45 to 70 is your highest turnout. Between the two age groups there, and then of course it starts coming down a little bit the older they get. But
So Andy asked earlier about, or maybe it was Henry, about how marketing and how you increase the voter turnout. Do you do any specific marketing to those groups that are more absent from the process?
we do.
Okay.
Yep. We go to high schools, we go to colleges. We've gone to places where they hang out, and done voter registration drives. We also work in concert with a lot of the civic organizations who do those voter registration drives as well. We'll support them when they do it.
So with 6 people in your office, I'm assuming some of these folks that are visiting are volunteers, because that's a very
Yes.
minor staff compared to the number of people you're trying to reach.
Yeah, we have a large group of people who are voter registration volunteers. We actually train them because, we just don't let anybody go get, voter registration applications. So they have to understand, what the laws are that,
Right.
Put this voter registration application together in the first place. And to know how to handle the application once it's done, what to ask for, what not to ask for, and that kind of a thing. So we've trained a good number of people, and like I said, most of the Democratic groups and the Republican groups, most of them have gone through the training, and so then when they do their voter registration drives, they're already trained and they can do it. So,
Are there, from a political perspective, throughout the country, we hear of these laws that are being developed or passed that are theoretically, at least, or they're suggested to be anti-voter. Are there any laws in Maryland that, not that you feel, but that you've heard or that are suggested are anti-voter and that cause folks not to show up to the voting booth?
well, I think that's an opinion.
Okay.
Calling something anti-voter or voter suppression.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right. So you're
know.
saying some people, what one person thinks, the other may not, and okay,
Yeah,
I got it.
You got
I
one
won't
half of the
push you
country
for
thinks
that
it's
one.
great, and one half thinks it's awful.
Yeah, right,
So,
exactly.
Well, here, I'll pivot away from that for 2 seconds because clearly it's an opinion piece. Is there any plans to increase your staff? Because I feel as though if there was a time to be able to ask for a little bit more money to hire some more people, if you think you need it, would be now, because you really rocked out, that 2020 election in a way that 0 fraud cases, people are getting through. Do you get to increase your staff, or is it just status quo from here on out?
Well, we actually did increase it from 5 to 6.
Oh, that's
So-
great. That's great. Okay.
So,
So you're still only half short, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
we had 5 people plus a full-time contractor getting us through last election. So we actually hired a 6th person just this couple months ago.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, now we're up to 6. So we feel pretty good where we're at.
You sure?
Yeah, because
I'm trying to promote like a double digits for you is what I'm saying if you need it. But
I appreciate that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but we do have some really good election judges that fill
Yeah.
in, when we need, so.
Yeah.
So here's an opinion piece that I think you can talk about. How's the new building?
Oh, right.
There
Tell
we
us about
go.
that.
I do have an
Yeah.
opinion on that.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, we love our new space. It was a long time coming. We've been in negotiations with the county government for years and years, trying to find a place. And, through no fault of anyone, we just weren't able to make it happen. We were trying to find the perfect place, and it just never really materialized. And then when the Shop and Saves, when they left town, there's a lot of empty buildings around town, So we really liked the one on Virginia Avenue because it was a standalone building, had a huge parking lot,
Right.
and it's kind of off the road a little bit. And but it's still close to town, still a good location. I mean, right there at the intersection of Halfway and Virginia Avenue. So we really pushed for that one. But what really was the catalyst to get us there was in 2020, we still didn't have an early voting site
Right.
identified. And I think I talked about this last time I was here probably. But we went to the county commissioners and said, look, guys, it's their responsibility to provide an early voting center. And and it was so, I remember, like it was yesterday, we were sitting in a room talking to them, and they said, what about this place, or what about that place? Yep, we talked to them, yep. I mean, every single place that they asked us about, we had been to. And for whatever reason, we couldn't make it work. In 2018, Hager Hall was our early voting site. It was a fantastic site, and it was way more than we even needed.
Right.
And, but they closed up, and so we were without an early voting site. And so really, I don't know if one of the commissioners just finally said, you know what, let's just buy the shop and save. Let's just get this over with and do it, And so that was the start. So they worked on the early voting center to make that ready in time for our primary election. And then while they got that done, then they started working on everything else. And so now the offices are done, the warehouse is done. So now everything has been moved into one location. And, for years, we never knew from election to election where our early voting site was going to be. We never knew where are we going to train our election judges. You need a big facility to train your election judges. And so, Kay Rabusi, our director, and I were talking about this earlier, and we were kind of running through the list of all the different places we'd been to.
Right.
We'd been to South High, we'd been to Tech High, we'd been to the Ag Center, we'd been to, the Red Cross for early voting, just all these different places. And every year we got to find a new place because we just never were able to glom on, But now that we've had our permanent place built, we always know where we're going to train our election judges now. And we always know where early voting is going to be, at least for one of them anyway. Yeah. And so that's a load off. And on top of that, not only do we know where that's going to be, but now we know all we have to do to move the equipment to train our election judges or to do early voting is from the room right behind there. Just move it in, there it is, as opposed to transporting it across town.
Yeah.
Which saves money.
It saves
obviously,
money.
And wear and tear on the equipment and everything
time.
else.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that risk that you're going to damage something when you move things, and
So I'd be really curious over time if that helps increase voter turnout for early elections, because now there's only one spot. I mean, there's one permanent place instead of having to move them around all over the county. I mean, I think there is.
Yeah, I think there is too.
I'd like that study in 5 years to see what happens.
I would agree with that because we've had calls from voters saying, where are you guys?
Right, right.
So you'll have the last word on that when we come back. More with our Deputy Director of the Board of Elections. Stay with us. And now they know.
Yeah, you were at such and such last year. What happened? So, yep, it's the same place every time.
Interesting. So there's 5 of you. That's what, a 15, 20,000 square foot building, maybe?
Yeah. 6 of them now, remember.
6. I'm sorry, there's
6
6 of them.
They had to do an addition to the building because they don't run out of space.
I guess my point is, obviously there's a lot of storage needs which were being handled. So how is that broken, how is that building divided up? Obviously there's got to be a big space for the early voting.
Yeah, probably a third of the building is the early voting training center. Our office obviously is the smallest part of it, with our 6 people. And then the warehouse is, more than half of that building is the warehouse. It's all the back half. We have all of our equipment laid out so that, we can test it and we can charge it, and, it's all laid out. And so it takes up a lot of room, with all that equipment. The black carts that carry everything to all the different polling places, So a lot of equipment, a lot of supplies, and so that takes up a lot of space.
And I'm assuming since it was previously a grocery store, getting equipment in and out is a lot easier because of the
doors in the back, right?
We have loading. We have 2 loading dock doors, which is wonderful, and and everything is flat too. I mean, everything is accessible. It's all on one level.
Right.
So that's really nice. You can roll the scanning units from the back all the way up front, and just it's nice.
Interesting.
And the county did a great job putting it together. I mean, it's a beautiful facility now, and so we're just proud to be there.
Yeah, well, there's been some pictures running, so we'll see those on the screen as we're talking about this. Excellent.
And the with the parking that we had at the early voting center, and once we get into post-COVID, okay, which hopefully we're there. We shouldn't have so much struggle with trying to find a parking place at because I know when I went out to vote, one time I just drove through the parking lot because I zigzagged all around. I couldn't find a place to park. I went out and I had to loop around and then come back because the parking you're jammed in tight because you have the people who are trying to sway you, so you have the buffer zone of running the gauntlet to get into the line.
Right.
And so they have their area, so that loses a row of parking, I think, on the one side. And then you have the handicaps, which obviously need to have consideration. And then the general parking, plus you're battling with a retail store and a bank
True.
that is trying to do business at the same time that you have people coming in. So, is there an idea of maybe getting some people from the Hagerstown Airport out with lights and directing them around and
Maybe a valet parking option? That's probably too extravagant.
Well, there was a suggestion that we're considering, and that was actually having a bus go from the Valley Mall parking lot to early voting and back, so you could park at Valley Mall. Now, that's all suggestions. We haven't even talked to Valley Mall about that. So,
Well, you have the shopping center that's catty corners from your voting.
True, there is that. Throughout early voting, we, again, we're learning as we went, right? I mean, we looked at that parking lot and thought, it's a huge parking lot. Well, we found out it wasn't as big as we thought.
No, it's not. And
Well, but hopefully you won't have the crowds.
Right. I mean, we're going to have 2 other early voting centers now.
Right.
So
Are they extending the time frame on the early voting, by the way? Is that
a great
being
question.
extended?
they are.
Okay, so what does that look like?
It's now going to be 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., just like Election Day.
What about in terms of the number of days?
It's still going to be 8 days. That was something that was talked about. They wanted to extend the number of days, but that didn't get through.
Okay.
Yeah, in the past it was pretty confusing to voters, the opening and closing times for early voting, because during the primary, the gubernatorial primary, and I guess the gubernatorial general, it was 10 to 8, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then in the presidential, the primary was 10 to 8, but then the general was 8 to 8. And so we had a lot of people that would drive up at 7 something in the morning to early voting. Well, we're not open until 10, so we had to keep going out and telling them. And so it was confusing. So, it's a good thing for the voters that it's going to be 7 to 8. It's not so good for the election officials,
No.
8 straight days of election day. And then we got to do election day after that, But it's a good thing for the voters because they'll always know it's 7 to 8.
And has there ever been consideration to have a canopy over the waiting line? Because you're out there, it's 95 degrees, it's a typical Maryland humid day.
Or pouring down raining
Or pouring down rain, which we had the one day. I think some of the voters actually were washed down the street there. Just to provide a little bit of cover.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying we can't have them in the building, but having an hour worth of wait and you're standing in 90-degree weather, or you're standing in a downpour, which I'm sure cut down the people showing up.
Yeah. And again, the whole coronavirus changed everything.
Yeah.
We had to have everybody separated 6 feet, and that's why we had those lines, zigzagged around the parking lot, because we had to have them separated, spread out. We actually had our facility built with a large lobby area with that thought in mind, that we could create a line inside the lobby, so they would be inside.
Okay.
And we also have that little overhang outside, once the grocery store overhang.
Yeah,
so
where the carts were and
Right.
stuff. Yeah.
So there is that. So we're hoping in a normal world that'll be enough, to keep people out from the elements. Because again, up until 2020, we had never ever seen lines like that.
Sure.
Ever.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
So
And
we're
if you
hoping
have
it
the
gets-
number of early voting centers expanded and the hours expanded, hopefully that's going to take care of the lines some as well, even if it does become a more popular item. Henry, having said that, though, maybe you should go to the commissioners and ask for a drive-through window.
Drive-through window.
Drive-through
Not a
window,
problem.
right.
Yeah, there we go.
So here's a question that I have. So, my mom is in a wheelchair, and although she, votes ahead of time, if she wanted to go to one of these polling places, there's no way she's going to be able to stand in that line. Not that I'm, we have handicapped parking. Is there like a handicapped or disabled or differently abled entrance that folks can? I mean, do they really have to stand for 3 hours sitting in a?
No. What we usually do is we have signs out that'll say, if you require assistance, see an election official. And then what we usually do is once they've done that, now we've identified them, we'll take them in to the front of the line. We don't have them butt in line, but we'll have them have a seat inside and wait. And we usually ask someone that's in line to hold their place.
Sure.
And then when they get to the front of the line, then they let them get in. And so we did that. We've done that for a number of elections now.
That's great.
But again, we don't make any assumptions, okay?
Yeah, folks have to speak up and ask for that help, of course.
Because we've had people offended when we say, hey, would you like help? No, I don't need help,
Yeah.
But
So-
you
Go
also
both
have
ways.
an option of voting a provisional If you don't want, if you're by yourself and you have a challenge of gaining access into the facility and don't want to wait 3 hours, they have the option. They could vote a provisional ballot.
Well, we did have that option in 2020
Okay.
because of the emergency proclamation, but
All right.
that's kind of gone away.
Okay.
Yeah, we just suggest, again, like I said, go into the front, just sit there at the front of the line and just, wait your turn.
Right.
It's better than being outside, or wherever it is. But, and again, I still go back to, I'm still hoping we're going back to normal lines. We're not
Right.
2-hour lines.
I haven't been in some restaurants recently. They've done away with handing out the little pagers. They take your cell phone number down.
Yeah, and they
So
shoot the
maybe
text.
we could just wait in the lot and our phone buzz. Okay, you're ready to vote.
Just wait in your car.
Yeah, just wait in the car.
Or the drive-through.
Or the drive-through. Yeah.
Yeah, man, that would be great.
Yeah, let me make a note of that.
Yeah, it's a good
That's
idea.
a
The
good
Henry
idea, Henry.
House changing in election laws.
Yeah. So we have just a couple of minutes left, and one of the things that I definitely wanted to cover as a part of this process is really the election calendar. And as I was looking for your email address and making sure you were still in your current job, which I'm glad to hear that you were.
Thank you. I am too.
I
Not as much as your family,
like-
right?
I happened to
Yeah, that is
download
true.
the election calendar off of the website, and I was shocked at the number of things that were on there. John Q. Public, myself included, as we look at that, what are the things that we should be cognizant of? What do we have to worry about
The deadlines.
from an election calendar
Yeah,
perspective?
it's pretty comprehensive. And yes, like you said, anybody can get to it. It's on our homepage on the website. They can download it. I think it's just an Excel file. It might
Right.
be PDF.
And
but
you
anyway.
can actually go in and see who's registered. There's some really
Yeah,
good,
sure.
not only at the local level, but state level,
right.
and yeah.
Yeah, just to give a plug for our website. I mean, anything that a voter would need to know, or a candidate, or anything, it's there. And our homepage is set up so that there's buttons, that deal with a certain thing.
Right.
Voter registration. Click on that, and it'll take you to the voter registration page. If you want to look at election results, which is what I did, to get ready for this meeting, just go on the election results, and it shows all past elections. But anyway, going back to the election calendar. Yeah, it's like, I don't know, 7-8 pages of, long,
12-point
lines.
type.
Yeah. Most of the stuff is really more for election officials, It's deadlines for campaign finance reports, things like that, that the normal voter is not going to care about. But things that you should look for usually are highlighted in bold. So if you look for anything that's highlighted in bold, it would be things like candidacy filing opened up on February 23rd of this year. So we're already in candidacy filing period, and we've had 11 people file for candidacy so far. And then it will show when the deadline is for candidacy filing, which is February 22nd of next year. So that's on the election calendar. Things like voter registration deadline, because there's a point where you are not able to register to vote anymore before the election. There's a 21-day period because we have to get our database set so that we can get ready for the election. So we have to shut down voter registration for 21 days. That's on the election calendar. So those are things that voters should really be paying attention to. It also shows when early voting opens, when it closes, shows when election day is. So those are the things, and they're all highlighted in bold. So that's what you want to look for.
So does the state of Maryland, are you able to register for vote on the same day as voting day?
You are. So
Yeah.
if you missed the deadline, that was 21 days ahead of time, don't fret, right? Because you can actually show up at the polling place and register to vote that day.
I
And
did
you
not
vote
know
provisional?
Not necessarily.
Oh, really?
If you are pre-qualified, which basically means you got a valid driver's license, and we have a scanner at the polling place. We scan that barcode on the driver's license. If it pops up on the poll book, you're qualified to vote. And so you get registered then, you can go vote a regular ballot.
Okay.
Yeah, there are some scenarios that I don't want to get into, but some scenarios where it may consider you not pre-qualified and you would have to vote a provisional, but that provisional would still count probably because you still were eligible to register
Yeah,
to vote.
yeah.
So.
Okay.
Okay.
That's neat.
Henry, any other questions?
Well, no, Andy stole my thunder on that one
did?
because I was going to say about same-day registration is available if I'm locating to Washington County 10 days before the election.
Right.
I'm in that little window there.
Yep.
As long as I make sure I have a valid ID that is issued by the county or by the state, then I can have the ability to vote. If I bring in a utility bill, does that count?
It does count, actually.
Okay.
And again, like I said, there are some scenarios where you wouldn't be pre-qualified, but you're still qualified.
Right.
Okay, so just because I'm saying you're not able to vote a regular ballot doesn't mean
It won't
your ballot's
count.
not going to count.
Doesn't mean that your vote won't count.
Correct.
Right.
You're still able to vote. You would just have to vote a provisional. So yes, utility bill, bank statement,
Okay.
paycheck, anything that has your address on it. You know.
And how do we verify that, oh, I just moved into the county and I cast a vote that I didn't vote in the previous area I came from?
In Frederick.
Yeah, I was in Frederick, and I was from
West
Spring
Virginia.
Mills, okay, and I've now moved into Maryland, so it's two completely different election systems.
True.
How do you know I didn't cast an early vote in West Virginia for their elections, and then come into Maryland and say, oh well, you know, I'm going to have two votes. You know, I'm going to vote for a governor in each state.
Well, we just worry about Maryland.
Okay.
So, you know, if you're qualified to vote in Maryland, we give you a ballot and you can vote the ballot.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you. This was very informative. I hope we can have you on again just before the election to talk about what has changed between now and then.
Yeah, glad to do it. Thanks for
All
having
right.
me.
Thank you. That's all the time we have tonight. We hope you will like us on Facebook. We hope you'll follow us on Twitter. We hope you'll send your suggestions and feedback to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That's feedback@theflipsidetv.com. Most importantly, join us again next week for another visit to the Flip Side. Good night.
It's all good, baby.
Is it really all good?
If you love me enough to routinely test your handyman skills, not to mention the strength of your marriage, then of course you'll visit nhtsa.gov/therightseat to make sure I'm in the right car seat.